Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today we have John Alberts from University National Oceanographic Laboratory System, and he'll be presenting on safety at sea. And you guys can type in questions at any point during the webinar, and we will be answering them at the end. So take it away, John.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Not sure where you're all calling in from, but thank you for joining me today. So the UNOLS office, we're based at the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography, and I've been in that position for 10 years, started my career in 1981 going to sea as a ship's officer, and spent about 25 years at sea on various ships, everything from the Bermuda Biostation to the Hui ships to working in the Antarctic. So I've had a long career of going to sea and been around safety and safety issues since I graduated from a maritime academy way back in 1979. So thanks for joining today, and I hope that this is useful. There's lots of topics to cover, and in an hour, any one of these topics you see on the screen here could be talked about for a half a day. So we're going to touch on these subjects, and I'm going to encourage you to think about these things. The webinar will be available after for your reference, but there's many of these areas that you could dig into further to get more information on. So this is just a real high-level overview of ship safety, some things for you to think about, some messages for you to take to sea, and hopefully keep you safe doing your at-sea field work. I'm not sure how many of you have sea experience, but so some of this may be old hat to some, but safety is one of those things that you can never stop thinking about, no matter if you're fresh out of school or you're in the latter part of your career. It's just one of those things it has to be on the forefront of your mind every time you step foot aboard a ship to do your field work. So today we're going to cover personal safety, getting your sea legs, lab safety, instrumentation safety, on-deck safety, over-the-side operations, a little bit about shipboard emergencies that you might encounter, safety equipment that would be put into place to deal with those emergencies, chain of command and communication, how those things are handled on a ship, a little bit about medical issues, culture at sea, and shipboard policies. So in the way of personal safety, there's many things that you can take into account to make sure that you're safe yourself. Safety is your own responsibility. There are going to be people that are going to be looking out for you, ship's crew, your other team members in your science party. But when it comes down to personal safety, you're really responsible for yourself and making sure that you make some preparations ahead of time to make sure that you are safe. So some things for you to think about are clothing and personal needs. Where are you going to be working? Is it a polar trip? Is it a tropic trip? Is it a mid-latitude trip? I think everybody knows as soon as you go offshore, the temperature is going to drop, whether you're working off Cape Cod in the summertime. It's a lot cooler at sea than it will be on land. Pre-existing conditions, whether it be a medical condition that you have or some type of disability that you have. Medical history. What is your medical history that may affect your ability to work at sea? And are you on any medications that might affect your alertness or your ability to perform in certain emergencies? Fatigue and extended work hours, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. There's a tendency to try to do as much work as you can to get all your field work done and all your experimentation done while you're at sea. So there's a tendency to really push yourself and work long hours. I've seen many scientists that will sort of forget about sleep and just work 18, 20 hours a day and just catch a cat nap and do that for a month. Well, that might be okay for a few days, but after a while, it's going to catch up with you and you're going to start making some bad decisions. So you need to keep that in mind as you're putting your science plan together and while you're working at sea. Sleep patterns, it's a little bit different working and living at sea. Sleep patterns are going to be interrupted. You're not going to be at your own home or in your own apartment, in your own bed. You're going to be in a bunk that's going to be rolling around a little bit. You may or may not have a roommate. And you're going to be working some odd hours. If you're not working your normal work hours that you're used to back in the lab or at the university, you may be working midnight to 4 or midnight to 6, and it certainly takes a little time to adjust to that. Pushing yourself too far, again, there's always a tendency to push to try to get as much done in a short amount of time but you have to keep that in balance with your own safety. Illness, injury, seasickness. Hopefully you're not going to incur any illness or injury while you're at sea, but in the event that you do, you have to take that into consideration. The ships might be more than a week away from medical attention, and so we'll talk about that a little bit later in medical issues, but you need to be really careful about preventing injury, and any illnesses that come up, you take care of them as quickly as possible. Another aspect of personal safety is family matters ashore. It's really important for you to stay focused when you're at sea. You really need all your attention on what you're doing, and if you have some serious family matters ashore that you're dealing with, it might be worth considering. Hopefully you would, if it was happening before you left, you might consider, well, maybe I should postpone this trip, or maybe I should send someone else in my place, because I'm really dealing with some personal issues back home, whether it be a sick family member that would really distract me while I was at sea and could cause the cruise to be diverted, and we're to the point where you had to put somebody off. So that's something to consider. We all have personal issues going on in our lives, but try to think about that as you plan your cruise and as you get to sea. Personal safety harassment, that's a very important topic today, and we'll talk about it a little bit further on in the discussion today, but all ships have policies for dealing with harassment, reporting, prevention, and these procedures are posted on the ship. So hopefully you won't incur or experience any type of harassment or bullying behavior, but the UNOLS fleet and all ships around the world now are taking this much more seriously and working to prevent it from really turning into an issue. Okay, talking about the right clothing. You've really got to have the right clothing for going to sea, depending on where you're working. This picture is taken from the Healy up at the North Pole a couple of years ago, and you'll see these folks are really outfitted for the operating area that they're working in. They've got proper boots, they've got heavy parkas, they've got good hats and gloves, and they're really prepared for the operating area that you're working in. You might be working in the tropics, where it's on the equator, and your type of gear that you would need would be quite a bit different. But you need to give that some thought as you plan your expedition. Okay, we talked about seasickness. Almost everybody gets seasick at sea. Luckily, I grew up around the water and didn't suffer from seasickness too much, but I have had my share of seasickness. It comes and goes depending on the motion of the ship. It depends on the stress level that you're under. It depends on the diet that you've had. You may have imbibed a little bit too much the night before you went to sea, and so you're feeling kind of lousy the day you set sail. But there's remedies for seasickness. I always told people that the best thing to do is get up on deck and get some fresh air. So you will be dealing with that. There are ship's medical officers on board that can help with seasickness and try to deal with that as best we can. You're going to be missing life at home, your loved ones, your friends. Your normal routine is going to be part of your thoughts out there, and so that's going to be a little bit hard. And then again, work stress. It's got a lot to do out there. Got a lot of experiments going on, lots of things to juggle, lots of things to keep in balance, and you're going to push yourself, and you're going to be affected by some work stress issues. I talked about the prevention for harassment. This is an example of a poster that was provided by Scripps. This is in the last few years, the UNOLS fleet has taken a really strong stance on this issue. All of our ships now have posters presented around the ship to how to deal with a situation that might come up, how to report it, and how to go ashore, how to contact someone ashore to help you with a situation that might be taking place. So you don't necessarily have to talk to the captain or the chief scientist. Now we have off-the-ship assistants that can help with these types of issues. So again, it's really important to, if you do feel like you've been a subject of discrimination or some form of harassment, or that if you witness a harassment or unfair practices, to bring it up and to talk to someone about it, and hopefully you can get it taken care of without it turning into a big issue that can really affect the sea expedition, your research, and everything going on around it. Okay. Okay. So the next piece, getting your sea legs. Being at sea is a lot different than life on land. There's some certain things that you're really going to have to watch out for, and these are things that you're going to have to be alert for all the time, whether it be the first day of the cruise, the middle of the cruise, or the end of the cruise. And some of these things are going to be foreign to you that if you haven't had sea experience, that are a little bit different from working around a lab. Watertight doors, ladders. You're going to go up and down ladders that are rather steep, not like a staircase in your lab. There's going to be the ship is moving, of course, depending on the sea state. The ship's going to be moving quite a bit, and you're going to have to be concerned about that. All the ships have hatches, coamings, and escape routes that you need to think about. Hatches are to keep water out of a watertight part of the ship. There's coamings around the watertight doors that prevent water from coming in on a wet deck. And those are things you're going to have to sort of navigate around as you work and live on the ship. One of the most important things about getting your sea legs and working on the ship is if you see something, or you really need to say something. If you see something that's a little bit out of line, that's potentially hazardous or a dangerous situation, if it just doesn't seem right to you, it's really important for you to talk to one of the crew members or the chief scientist and just point it out. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a little something that's quite normal. But if you see something that doesn't quite sit right, please bring it up. And then again, spills, any kind of spills you see around the ship, point them out. So here's an example of some things that you're going to have to look out for on a ship. Watertight doors. So the ship has to maintain watertight integrity in the event of a bad storm where you had a lot of water on deck, or a breach of the hull where the ship had to take on a list. The ship has watertight compartments that keep that buoyancy intact in the event of an emergency on the ship. So in the left-hand side there, you'll see watertight door. The door is labeled watertight door. Same on the right side, just a different type of door. And all of these doors are very heavy. If the ship's rocking and rolling, when you go through that door, you've really got to hold on to it and make sure that your fingers are clear of the metal edge where that door meets the side of the ship. Watertight doors have handles which are this picture shows the handle in the middle of the door, but some of the older ships have dogs, they're called dogs, around the side of the door. And each of those dogs or handles have to be opened or closed as you go through the watertight door. You can never leave a watertight door to swing freely on its own, because that door may weigh 100 or 200 pounds of steel with some insulation. And it's really important. In the right-hand side, you'll see a latch mechanism, so that if you're going through that door and you need to keep it open, you need to make sure that it's latched. But be really careful about these watertight doors and stepping over the coaming. The picture on the left with the rounded corner watertight door, below that is the coaming. That's the area that you're going to have to step over from the main deck into the passageway on the other side of that door. And invariably, you're going to come home from sea with lots of bruises on your shins. But be careful about going through those watertight doors. Okay, watch for your hands and feet and the gear that you're carrying through that door. Moving around the ship requires caution. This picture is a photograph of a marine mammal observer station taken on board the Marcus Langfest, a marine seismic vessel. Many of our ships have observation stations above the bridge or on a bridge wing for mammal observer or bird observing work. You're going to be going up and down these ladders. So you'll see in that picture there's a very steep ladder that it's going to take to navigate to get up there with your binoculars or your notebooks or your laptops. And it's going to be really important that you always, there's a rule of thumb in going to sea, is that you always have one hand for the ship and one hand for yourself. So again, you have one hand on the rail going up, and you have one hand for whatever you're carrying. Okay, so never try to go up and down a ladder without holding on to that ladder, because the ship will take rolls, unexpected rolls. Okay. When is it safe to go on deck? And does anyone else know that you're there? So this is a photograph of the research vessel, the Thompson. And it's not uncommon for a vessel to encounter some pretty heavy sea states that are going to incur during the cruise, depending on where you're working and where your instrumentation is set up. On the Thompson, they have labs that are set up forward, and you can see the foredeck of this ship. That's a pretty unsafe condition right now for you to go up there and work. There could be some green water coming over the side of the ship in this case, and this happens on the fantail as well. So the ship's crew, the ship's officers, and the captain will always be looking out for you in these situations. There are going to be times where the deck will be cordoned off, and you won't be allowed to go on deck at all. And it's for your own safety. The ship will have to sort of heave to and just wait for the storm to pass, and wait for the sea conditions to be safe enough for you to be on deck. Okay. If if you are on deck, you really need to let somebody know where you are, whether it be night or day. There's parts of these ships that are quite isolated. If you did happen to slip and fall overboard, typically if you're on the port side of a research vessel, most research vessels work pretty much on the starboard side. But if you were on the port side and you were going up alongside the deck and you slipped and fell into the water, nobody would hear you fall in. So it's really important to keep that in mind. If you're going to be going up on deck, not in this particular weather condition, but on a normal day, to check the sensors on that Met tower up on the bow, it's a really good idea to let somebody in your lab group, your science party, or one of the ship's officers, the bridge, I need to go up on the bow, I need to check that Met sensor, is it safe to do so? And just, you let them know when you go up, and when you get back to the lab, it's good to call the bridge and say, okay, I'm back in on deck, and everything's fine. So just let someone know where you are at all times. And we talked a little bit about if you see something, say something. This is really important. If you see an oil spill in the water from some part of the ship, perhaps there's a stern tube that's leaking oil, or a hydraulic hose on the A-frame that's leaking, or one of the science winches is leaking oil, and you've caused a slick in the water. If there's a slick in the water from a ship, there's a good probability that there's probably an oil spill on deck somewhere. And there's nothing worse than a mixture of seawater and oil to make a really slippery deck where you can take a serious fall, not to mention the environmental damage that you're doing. So I can't stress the importance enough of if you see something, to say something. Okay, so changing gears now a little bit away from personal safety, thinking about lab safety. I don't know how many of you have had formalized lab safety training. Some folks do. There's going to be times where you'll have folks in your science party that are inexperienced with really no lab safety training at all. They might be perhaps a science writer that's joined your science party, or an undergraduate student who really hasn't had any formal lab safety training. It's really important to keep lab safety in mind. For the most part, the ship's crew are going to rely on the training that you've had, the knowledge that you bring to the lab in dealing with the kind of chemicals and substances, materials that you're working with. They'll feel that you know more about those chemicals that you're bringing on board than they will. So it's really important for you to have material data, safety data sheets on all the chemicals that you have. You'll see a notebook there in the left. Some ships will have these notebooks set out, and they may have the material safety data sheets of all the chemicals that they normally carry on a cruise, but there's going to be times where you bring chemicals that are out of the ordinary, and we need to make sure we have those safety data sheets. The fume hood in the middle there. It's really important that if you're doing work with chemicals, substances that have toxic fumes, that you have proper ventilation. It's important to check with the ship's crew and make sure that that fume hood, or the marine technician, is that the fume hood is working well and that it's actually venting to the outside. We've had instances in the past where These fume hoods are vented externally outside the lab to the side of the ship, but for one reason or another, the vent cover on the fume hood exhaust had been closed for maintenance or for an extended period of layup on the ship, and someone forgot to open up the vent hood. So keep that in mind when you start using fume hoods. Is the ventilation open and working? Chemical storage, that's really important. There's a tendency to probably bring more chemicals than you need for your experiment because you can't just run to the stockroom and get another supply, so you may bring more than you need. So you're going to have to store these in flammable, chemical-proof lockers that are made for that purpose. And all of the UNOLS ships have some sort of arrangements for the storage of these chemicals. You'll have a certain amount that you keep on the lab or underneath the bench where you're working, but the excess quantity will need to be stored somewhere. Lithium batteries, certainly a potentially dangerous situation, whether it be in your laptop or a battery that's coming up in acoustic release from a mooring that's been deployed for 6 months or a year. You're going to be relying upon your knowledge of that equipment as well as the marine personnel, whether it be the bosun or the res tech who's helping you recover that mooring. And lithium batteries really take some special precautions. We have, in the UNOLS, we have some really good documentation on handling lithium batteries, so that'll be available for your use. Spill kits. The chemicals that you bring on board, every ship has different policies for who provides the spill kits. So it'll be really important for you as you're planning your cruise to identify the spill kits that are required and who's providing them, whether it be the ship or you. The ship typically will have sort of the generic spill kits for common chemicals, but you're going to be bringing gear on board that may or may not be something that they can handle on the ship. Okay. Securing gear, gas cylinders, instrumentation. It's going to be really important for you to secure gear on the ship. If you have a instrumentation on a desktop or a bench top, and the ship takes a 25 or a 30-degree roll, that piece of gear is not tied down. It's going to end up on the deck. It'll either be broken or cause damage to the ship or hurt somebody as it falls. So securing gear has to be second nature. Whenever you bring gear onto a ship, you make sure it's secure, as with gas cylinders and any other instrumentation on deck. The ship's crew, they're going to walk around before they sail, whether it be the chief mate or the marine technician, one of the other ship's officers, the chief engineer. They're going to be walking around the ship, taking a look at this, making sure that everything is secure, so that when you do throw the lines off and the ship is subject to rolling from the sea states, that this gear is secure and that one is not going to fall and damage it, or someone's going to get hurt from a piece of gear that's heavy, gets rolled and moves across the deck and hurts someone. Eye wash stations. All of the labs have eye wash stations and emergency showers in the event of your clothing caught on fire or you got a chemical in your eye. These are all of ships. On the right-hand side, you see the green unit there. That's an eye wash station. They may look a little bit different, but the basic idea is that you bring your face down to the eye wash station, you lift the cover off, and a stream of saline water will come up and wash your eyes out. On the left-hand side, you'll see a triangle handle here where you pull, and this is an actual shower of water that will come down and rinse you off or put a potential fire out of your clothing. So all of the ships have these. So it's important for you to identify where they are in the lab. Make sure that you don't have a lot of gear that's stacked up. I've seen instances where this looks like a good shelf. The eye wash station looks like a good shelf to put your hat and gloves and raincoat. And so that it's really important not to obstruct these safety instrumentation that is so important for your safety. Okay, instrumentation safety. So much of the gear that you bring aboard in oceanographic research it may or may not be prototype equipment. It might be equipment that it hasn't been to sea before. It might be a new instrument that you've been developing for a few years, and this will be the first time you're taking it to sea. There may be inherent dangers in this piece of equipment. It might not have all the safety guards and precaution apparatus that you need to shut it down quickly. because it's a prototype. It hasn't gone through the rigors of use before. And so as you bring this gear aboard, you need to think about how it's going to affect the ship and how it's going to potentially impact your safety. So it's going to be, and again, it's going to impact the success of your cruise. So there's a couple things to think about. You really need to test your gear before you take it to sea. I know that might be hard to assimilate the same conditions that it's going to go through at sea, but we have test labs, we have pressure tanks that you can test your gear. We have deep wells at a lot of the marine facilities that you can put your gear in the water and see how it's going to react. You're going to need to know your gear. You're going to need to know the limitations of it. Hopefully you'll have an operating manual that'll go with it. You'll need to know what the safety concerns are with that piece of gear and how it operates. And again, securing your gear. Oh, one more thing, spare parts. It's really important for you to bring spare parts. I'll just add that, and not really a safety concern, but bringing spare parts so that if this widget breaks, it doesn't take your whole science plan down, and you can keep going on with the science expedition. So bring your spare parts. So on deck safety. Ships are inherently dangerous places. It's a combination of moving deck, could be an extreme environment, whether it be hot or cold. You're going to have heavy equipment that's working around the ship. You're going to have wires under tension, ropes under tension. This is a picture of a mooring line going out through the chalk as the ship was docking or undocking. And those are heavy lines, and there's potentially dangerous there, and just handling those. You're going to have shifting science cargo. You're going to have cargo overhead. And there's just some dangers there that you need to be aware of as you work with this gear. So one of the things you need to think about is how many people you have on deck when you're doing an evolution. This picture, there's 5 people involved here. This is a mooring, either mooring recovery or mooring deployment. I'm not quite sure, but 5 people is probably too many people there. You know, the old saying, too many cooks in the kitchen. It can be a hazard for moving around. It can be a hazard when the people operating the winch can't see the instrumentation that's coming in or going out. The winch operator is probably standing forward of these techs on board there. You get too many people clustered around the instrumentation, they can't see. And then there's a high chance of a communication confusion on who's in charge, who's giving orders. You know, when things get a little hairy or a little out of the ordinary, there's a tendency, human nature is to speak up and start saying, do this, do that. And it creates a more dangerous situation when you have too many people trying to run things back there on the back deck. So keep that in mind as you're putting your science plan together and planning for these deployments. Wires under tension. When you deploy a piece of gear, all research vessels have some form of overboarding handling equipment. This particular ship is an A-frame back off the back deck of a ship. This is where the gear is going to be deployed through a block at the top there and lowered into the water. There's going to be a lot of tension, wire tension forces at play here that you need to be thinking about. You'll see the picture there on the bottom. This person here with her right arm handing out, she's giving signals to the winch operator. So the communication between this person and who's ever running the winch is really important. But these are heavy loads that are subject to a rolling ship. The wire tension can change quickly. There'll be times where the weather may pick up during a deployment or a recovery. It may start out relatively calm sea state, but halfway through the evolution, the weather may pick up really quickly. And so your wire tensions and the stresses on the package are going to change midstream during the deployment. So something to think about. There's going to be dynamic loading changes on the package depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a rock dredging evolution, there's off the stern here, there's times where the wire tension is going to go way up when that rock dredge hangs up on some rocks on the bottom of the ocean. The wire tension is going to shoot way up, and you've got to really be careful about where you are in relationship to that wire that's under tension. Not to mention things that are overhead. As it goes out through the A-frame, you're required to clear the back deck and to get the string of instrumentation over the side and into the water. There's going to be times where this top float here is going to be way up high, so you're going to have high loads, high tensions working overhead. So potentially a dangerous situation for personnel who are working underneath that gear. Okay. And then there's going to be times where you got really heavy loads on deck. This is a picture of a mooring deployment. The old saying that a body in motion stays in motion is very true on a ship. This looks like a pretty nice day, probably up in Puget Sound. You can see the Olympic Peninsula there in the background, the mountains. Things are pretty calm. Not a lot of inherent motion of the ship. So that piece of gear is going into the water quite nicely. They've got lots of tag lines on it. Looking at that picture, they probably got too many people on the back deck. Again, that looks a little crowded to me. The potential for someone to be in the way or to get hurt looks a little bit like that could be the case there. But if this was a different sea state, the ship could be rocking and rolling. These tag lines will keep the package from moving too much, but there are times where the slip line or the tag line could slip. This heavy mooring could come up against the leg of the A-frame, and if you're between the mooring buoy and the A-frame leg, the crush hazard, the pinch hazard, or even the hazard of being knocked overboard is high. So you really got to be careful about doing these over-the-side deployments. If you're not comfortable with this kind of work, you should always ask for help. It's really important to rely on the expertise of those around you, whether they be in the science party or the ship's crew. They're all really seagoing people love to help others. That's why they choose this line of work. They like working at sea. They like working with scientists. They like exploring new things. It's just a good adventure for them, and they're more than willing to share information on how to get this stuff in and out of the water safely. Okay, over-the-side operations. The first thing about over-the-side operations is that you think about it months before you go to sea. You've really got to plan it out and think about it and document it and rehearse it and then communicate it. Before any piece of gear goes over the side of a research vessel, one of the first things you need to do is to get your people together and make sure that everyone's clear as to what their job is in that over-the-side deployment. Whether their job is to hold the clipboard and jot down the time and position of when that instrument went in the water, or do you have a person on deck who's just the eyes of the safety eyes of the operation, keeping an eye open for potential hazards? You need to know who's going to do the tag lines, who's going to run the winch, and so that's really important to plan that out, rehearse it, document it ahead of time. And again, who's in charge? Really important that somebody is identified as the person in charge that can give the directions, give the orders, and make the decisions in the event that things don't go as planned. You need that one person to make those decisions as to what needs to be done next to prevent potential accident or to correct the evolution that's in progress, and so that someone doesn't get hurt. And again, getting permission from the officer of the bridge. Many times instrumentation goes in the water. It's inherently dangerous having oceanographic cables, mooring lines, streaming behind the ship. The potential of getting caught in the ship's propellers is high. It's really important that the bridge officer who's driving the ship is aware of what you're putting in the water. And that can be as simple as out on the back deck with a bucket, taking a surface sample. You might be steaming along at 12 knots and you throw a bucket in the water to get a surface sample. The bridge needs to know that. Okay, so first thing to do is get on the phone, get on the radio. Some ships have landline type phones pictured here. Some ships will rely on VHF radios. or some of the older ships have what we call squawk boxes, where you'll just get on there, call the bridge and say, bridge, this is the lab. We'd like to put some gear in the water. Do we have permission? So that gives the bridge time to slow the ship down, to get on station, to position the ship with the wind on the bow, depending on what you're putting in the water, so that the ship doesn't blow back down over the wire or the piece of gear that you're putting in. And everybody knows what's going on. It also allows the bridge to notify the engine room that they need to shut off a pump or stop a discharge or put on an extra generator. If they're going to be doing a piece of a heavy deployment of gear, it may require a second generator come online to provide the electrical power that you need for your instrumentation. So again, keeping everybody in the loop, informed, and you can't give more information. You can never give too much information. The bridge really appreciates knowing what's going on. The worst thing a bridge officer can say or feel is, well, I don't know what they're doing on the back deck. They haven't called me. They haven't told me what's going on. So keep those communication lines open. Okay. There's unique instrumentation that comes on these ships. You know, by the nature of the work that we do, research vessels are always developing new equipment, trying out new things, developing new instrumentation for a different sampling regimen. Or they might be just doing a net tow, sort of old hat CTD rosette cast. But oftentimes you'll be doing putting a new piece of gear in the water that's really never been tested before. So it takes a certain special coordination and planning. I'm not sure what this piece of gear was. I found this on one of our ships. They were putting in the water, and that looks pretty gangly piece of gear to put in the water. And probably never been used before. So it's going to take some special communication, coordination, and planning. You need to consider the scale of the operation of what you're putting over the side. These are two bongo nets going over the side. They look to be about 18 feet long. It looks like they're working in the ice there. So you need to consider the scale of it. Not all plankton nets are equal. And same with some of the sampling gear that you're going to be working with. Some of the rosettes are going to be really big, and they're going to add a certain level of complexity that is going to require additional coordination and forethought and planning before you put them over the side. Okay. Or it may be relatively simple. Doing an XPT off the back deck there, the top right picture. Fairly simple. You've called the bridge ahead of time, let them know what's going on. Or it could be really complex. Launching, this would be, let's see, this would be a recovery of the Alvin, where they bringing the Alvin back aboard. The swimmers have come from the small boat there in the water. They've hooked up the lift line to the lifting pad eye on the Alvin, and then once the Alvin is clear, the swimmers jump in and get back in the boat. But this all takes a lot of coordination and planning. Whether it be a simple evolution of doing an XPT or a really complex recovery of the Alvin. So shipboard emergencies. There's going to be times where something's going to come up that's going to create an emergency on board the ship. It could be a fire. It could be a person that's fallen overboard. It could be someone that's seriously injured from a piece of machinery. Or it could be a situation, luckily we haven't had any of those, where a ship actually the hull is breached and they're taking on water. So some of the things that you as a scientist need to think about is, what is your role? And all ships have a poster on the ship. It's called a station bill. And this is a poster that's posted several places throughout the ship. It's a list of all the duties of each person, from the captain through all the science party members, chief scientists, scientists 1, 2, 3, and 4, right down through the entire crew. And it lists the duties of each person, that their response in the event of an emergency. Typically, the captain or the chief mate is going to be in charge. The chief scientist role, in most cases, will be to take a muster of the science party, gather them together in a designated area. Before you leave the dock on a cruise, you'll have an orientation And during that orientation, they'll identify where the emergency gathering spot will be on the ship, whether it be in the main lab or on the main deck somewhere. So the chief scientist will be responsible for making sure that everyone's accounted for and no one is missing during an emergency. So the one thing to consider is, do you have skills that the crew should be aware of? If you're a nurse or a medic, that might be a good thing to tell one of the ship's officers before you sail, that you've had extensive experience serving as an EMT or a firefighter at one time. Do you have training in lab safety and dealing with radioisotope spills or lithium battery disposal, or electrical? Do you have electrical training that could really come in handy in the event of an electrical fire with a piece of science gear? So let the crew know any special skills you might have. The other thing for you to consider as a scientist is, have you informed the crew of potentially hazardous cargo that would come into play if an emergency was on hand? Are you storing potentially lots of inflammable chemical in the main lab? The main lab's on fire and you've got quite a bit of flammable cargo in the lab. You should really let the chief mate or someone know about that ahead of time before an emergency actually takes place. So I know this is a really brief overview on shipboard emergency. We could talk about this for hours, but just some things to keep in mind is, all ships, these are international signals for fire emergency, abandoned ship, and man overboard. On that station bill that I talked about before, this will be described again. So it's really important when you join a ship to walk around and identify where these station bills are and take the time to read them, so that when the emergency comes, you know exactly what you need to do. Okay. Fire emergency, fire alarm must a continuous blast of the ship's whistle for a period of not less than 10 seconds, followed by a continuous ringing of the ship's general alarm bells for 10 seconds. And then dismissal from fire stations is usually 3 short blasts of the ship's whistle. In the event that the captain decided that you needed to abandon ship, the signal would be 6 short blasts, followed by 1 blast on the ship's whistle, followed by that on the general alarm bell. The general alarm bell sounds like an old school bell. You've all heard those. It's just a regular old bell there's stationed throughout the ship, and every part of the ship you can hear these whistles and these bells. Man overboard, the routine there is that you hail, you pass the word, and you keep an eye on the person. Some of the safety equipment to be concerned with. It's going to be really important when you join a ship is to identify the location, be familiar with the use, and if you have questions on any of the safety equipment, to just ask the crew. So everyone will have a life jacket with a whistle and man overboard beacon assigned to them. The bunk card, in each of your staterooms, you'll have a thing called a bunk card, and that'll identify which life raft, which emergency station you should go to, which life raft is you're assigned to, and other information on the fire emergency or man overboard situation that might be developing. Everyone will have an emergency suit. I'll show a picture of that. There'll be life rings around the ship. In the event of someone falls overboard, you would need to throw that. Hard hats, work vests, and safety shoes. I'll show a picture of that. Ear and eye protection. EPIRB, that's an emergency positioning indicating radio beacon. In the event that the ship sank, an EPIRB would go off and float and transmit to a satellite to the Coast Guard to let you know where you are. So this is a typical picture of a firefighting station. There are different classes of fire. I won't go into that now, but throughout the ships, this is a standard labeling system, typical of any ship really. These will be positioned throughout the ship. You want to identify where they are and be familiar with them in the event that you needed to deal with a fire. The first thing with a fire, though, is to notify the bridge that you've located a fire and pass the word as quickly as possible before you start fighting it, so that you're not left down there by yourself fighting a fire. I mentioned emergency suits and life jackets. Every stateroom will have life jackets, the old-fashioned life jackets that go over your head with a strap around your back. Your emergency suit will be there. They will also have emergency escape breathing devices. These are EEBDs. So this is a bag that goes over your head, gives you between 7 to 15 minutes to get out of a smoke-filled area to an area of fresh air for your escape. And all of the ships have these for each person on board. It's also important for you to know your escape route from your stateroom. So here's some pictures of what some safety equipment would look like, what you could expect to see. The top left there is an emergency suit, also known as a survival suit. Everyone will have one of those on board, and you will be given an opportunity during the orientation to try one on and make sure that you're comfortable in how it's used. Top right is a typical life raft canister. They'll be up on the weather decks on the port and starboard side. Your bunk card will identify which life raft you would go to. Okay, the port side is for the even numbered life rafts, and the starboard side is for the odd number life rafts. Oh, sorry. Life rings around the ship. In the event that somebody fell overboard, first thing that you want to do is to throw that person a life ring. It has a light attached to it, and that'll help the bridge keep an eye on the person, circle around, and pick them up. Okay, chain of command. Ships are still a hierarchical system. The purpose of that is in the event of emergency, you really need to know who's in charge, who's calling the shots, and what is my role in all of that. So it's still very much the captain's in charge, the chief scientist in charge for his or her science party, and it works on down through the crew. Each of those crew members has a responsibility, but so the chain of command is still alive and well, a very important part of going to sea. It may seem a little old-fashioned to have a hierarchical system, but when things go sour, it's really important to have that very distinct chain of command. Medical issues. Medical emergencies at sea can really be disruptive. It's really important. Most research vessels, one of the crew members will be designated as a medical person. He or she may have various levels of training. It might be an EMT level, perhaps a paramedic. It's unusual for us to have a full-fledged physician's assistant or a doctor on board. So one of the crew members will be designated to handle any kind of medical emergencies that might come up. The take-home message on medical issues is as soon as you have an accident or a medical situation, is to notify the medical person, whether it be a small cut that could turn into an infection, which if it can't be controlled, the crews would be diverted and you would have to be put into, get to a shore medical facility. So medical issues, no matter how minor, let somebody know. Medical history and medications. All of the ships have medical history forms. I know it's sometimes sensitive information that we're sharing, but the only reason we're asking for that information is so that in the event that you did become incapacitated, unconscious, and couldn't communicate to that medical person that you do, say you are a diabetic, or you do have a history of seizures, or you're allergic to certain medications. By providing some of that information ahead of time, it allows them to treat your condition much better. Pregnancy at sea, for the most part, we allow, each ship has their own policy for pregnancy at sea, but for the most part, we follow the Coast Guard or the Navy, which allows pregnancy up to the 20th week. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about is culture at sea. What may be perfectly acceptable to one culture may be offensive to others. So you're going to be dealing with lots of different people from all over the world, different crew members who have different cultural backgrounds, different mores that may or may not be offensive to you. And so I think the thing to think about is just try to approach the situation with mutual respect, be courteous, be polite, be friendly, and just realize that there are going to be cultural differences at sea, and just need to be sensitive to that so that you can all work together. And I don't think that comes as any great surprise. Um, you know, the science parties today on a multidisciplinary cruise maybe have 10 different nationalities on board from all over the world, and they all require that mutual respect from everyone. And just closing here, shipboard policies. We have a combination of UNOLS specific policies that apply to all UNOLS ships, and then there are certain areas that we rely on the university institution to have their own specific policies. All of the ships do a really good job at posting these policies. They have handbooks around the ship. We have the UNOLS safety standards, and all of these policies are readily available for you to read about and study. So in summary, with just a few minutes left here for questions, take responsibility for your own safety. It's really important for you to be prepared when you go to sea. You have to look out for yourself first. There is going to be someone looking after you as well, but you need to take care of yourself first so that in the event you need to be called into action, you'll be your own personal safety will be ready and taken care of, and you can help someone else. Don't make assumptions. That saying could never be more true than going to sea. You can't assume that the ship is going to have a medication that you might need for your condition. You can't assume that the chief engineer is going to have some equipment that you need to make your instrumentation work. Keep your eyes open. That's really important, and trust your own intuition. When I was going to sea, there were times where I would see something that didn't quite sit right, and a couple of times in my experience, something didn't quite look right. I didn't speak up, and sure enough, somebody got hurt from that situation. So if you see something that doesn't sit well, speak up. Don't be afraid to mention something, no matter how minor it might seem. It's better just to check it out, make sure it's all good, and then you can go ahead. Be open to suggestions from those who might have more experience. Everyone's got different levels of experience. Isn't age specific. It's experience specific, and you can certainly learn from those around you who may have been doing this longer or had different experiences that they can share with you, and just help it go much better. Again, be prepared. Be ready for the experiment and for the field expedition, and have your gear together, and enjoy it and have a good time. So thank you. We have a few minutes for questions here. I'm going to check with the organizers here if they have any questions for me. If not, you're welcome to contact me, john@unols.org. I'm happy to answer questions or point you in directions of different resource material that might come in handy. Put you in touch with someone that might have more experience for what you're going to be doing. And I thank you for your attention today, and hope you all have a good weekend. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. We have a few minutes for questions, and they can be sent through the chat function, and I can pass them over to John. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. And this webinar is also recorded, so if you need it for future reference, it'll be available online within a few days, and all participants will receive an email when it is available and with the link.
If there's anything that I went over too quickly, or you'd like to revisit one of the slides, please let me know.
We have a question. What is the ship? How does the ship prepare for extreme weather like tropical storms, hurricanes?
The ships rely on weather forecast reports that come in via satellite. We certainly rely on the National Weather Service. We rely on Coast Guard reports. We rely on shore-based weather forecasting models. Most of the ship's officers are trained in reading, analyzing meteorological reports and different documentation that comes in, say a high pressure, low pressure, and so they know based on the forecast and the track of the storm how to respond to that situation. They're all
Great.
trained in meteorology and
Mhm.
heavy weather sailing as well.
Okay, thank you. And we have a
Okay.
next question. Do you provide courses for sea safety? If so, how do we sign up? And will we need a certification before joining a crew or ship to perform research?
The UNOLS office doesn't provide training. Some of the operators set up training courses for the community. There are many institutions and learning centers that provide that kind of training for maritime training. At present, the UNOLS fleet doesn't require certification that you've had any training. I know many of our colleagues, particularly in Europe, require that you've had some safety training ahead of time for the science party. All of the crew members are required to have certifications for safety, but at present, the science party doesn't require safety certification.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. If
Okay.
there is anyone who has any last minute questions, we can take them now. And just a reminder, next week on Friday, November 2nd, the fourth installment in the Early Career Scientist series is occurring from 2 to 3 p.m. And that will be on Science Communication at Sea with Ken Costell from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And we will send out another email with the details and the link for that as a reminder. And I don't see any more questions. So
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining the webinar today on a Friday afternoon. I encourage you to contact us if you have any questions or would like me to put you in touch with someone. The UNOLS office provides that resource of answering questions, and if we don't have the answer, we can certainly put you in touch with someone that does. So use the UNOLS office as a resource, and we'd be happy to help in any of this that we've discussed today. So thanks a lot, and have a great weekend.
great. Thank you so much, John.
Okay, Lauren, take care now.
Thanks.